A killer leaves his wallet at the scene. A cop returns in uniform to investigate her own crime. Another boasts in writing, convinced he can't be tried again, and yet another parades a victim's skull fragment on campus. These are not criminal masterminds. They are the world's dumbest killers on death row, each doomed by an unbelievable mistake that sealed their fate. But just how could errors this catastrophic bring their own executions closer than any detective ever could? The answer starts with one wallet left exactly where it shouldn't have been. In August 1990 in Gainesville, Florida, 5 college students were murdered in less than a week, and panic spread across the city. Behind the headlines was Danny Rolling, a drifter with a violent past and a taste for theatrical brutality. 18-year-old Krista Hoyt, a records clerk and student, became his third victim. Rolling broke into her apartment late at night, attacked her, and staged the scene in a way that guaranteed attention from detectives across the state. But Rolling's need for control worked against him. He left behind more than horror. He left a forensic trail. Investigators found footprints and fibers at the scene, and later, DNA evidence would match Rolling to the crime. His fingerprints showed up on a mirror in another victim's apartment, linking him to multiple murders. Police pieced together the evidence, tracing it back to a makeshift campsite where Rolling had stashed tools and stolen items from his victims. While Rolling tried to keep moving, the forensic net tightened. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement processed the fibers, prints, and biological evidence, documenting every transfer and chain of custody. When Rolling was finally arrested after a robbery in Ocala, his prints and DNA matched samples from the Gainesville crime scenes. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Rolling pleaded guilty to all 5 murders in February 1994. He was sentenced to death and executed in October 2006. Krista Hoyt and 4 other students lost their lives, and Rolling's compulsion to leave his mark made sure he would never escape the consequences. March 1995. Houston police responded to a call on the city's north side. Leah Joette Smith, 29, was found after an attack near a vacant lot. The crime scene offered little in the way of witnesses or clear leads. No cameras, no confessions. Investigators relied on the physical evidence left behind, trace fibers, biological samples, and the pattern of injuries. Forensic teams collected everything: clothing, bedding, swabs, each item logged and sealed for the lab. Every step was documented through chain of custody forms, creating an unbroken record from the scene to the courtroom. The lab results changed everything. DNA analysis matched biological material found on Smith to Johnny Ray Johnson, a former taxi driver with a record of violent assaults. Detectives already knew Johnson from previous investigations. Now they had a direct biological link. When questioned, Johnson's answers did not add up. His timeline shifted. His explanations contradicted the evidence. But the science was clear. His DNA placed him at the scene with no innocent explanation possible. Prosecutors built their case around the forensic match. The jury heard testimony from analysts who described the process, how samples were collected, how each transfer was recorded, and how the results were checked and double-checked. The defense challenged the evidence, but the chain of custody held. On May 21, 1996, Johnson was convicted of aggravated sexual assault and capital murder. He was sentenced to death and spent 13 years on Texas's death row. On February 12, 2009, the state carried out his execution. Leah Smith was killed in a senseless act of violence, and the evidence Johnson left behind ensured that he would never escape responsibility. When a personal item like a wallet or a footprint is left at a crime scene, it can change the entire course of an investigation. In forensic work, every object is more than just a clue. It is a potential link in a chain that leads from the scene to the courtroom. The first step is always documentation. Officers photograph the item exactly as found, then place it in an evidence bag, seal it, and log every detail: who collected it, when, and where. This is the start of what is called the chain of custody. From that moment, every transfer, whether to a lab technician, a detective, or a prosecutor, is recorded. If a wallet is found, analysts check it for fingerprints, fibers, or biological traces. Even if the item appears wiped clean, the act of returning to the scene or handling the evidence can leave new marks, a partial print, a trace of DNA, or a unique pattern of wear. Forensic labs use established protocols to process these items. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, that meant everything from dusting for prints to running DNA profiles, all while maintaining an unbroken record of who handled the evidence and when. If a suspect tries to explain away the presence of their wallet or print, claiming it was lost or borrowed, investigators compare their story to the physical evidence and the timeline. Inconsistencies become as important as the item itself. Surveillance footage and physical evidence together can create a timeline that is hard to dispute. A palm print on a car door, a blood trace in a vehicle, or a signature on a store log, all of these are logged, analyzed, and compared against known samples. When the chain of custody is solid and the forensic work is thorough, even a simple mistake, like leaving behind a wallet, can become the linchpin in a conviction. The science does not care about alibis or excuses. It cares about what was left behind and what those traces reveal. New Orleans, March 1995. The Kim On restaurant was a family business, trusted by locals and regulars alike. Among those regulars was Officer Antoinette Frank, a familiar face to the Vu family who owned the place. On a rainy night, Frank and her boyfriend Rogers Lacaze entered the restaurant after closing. Within minutes, 3 people were shot dead: the owner, Quang Lam, his wife Chung Boy Lam, and an employee, Ha Thi Le. The scene was chaos, gunfire in the kitchen, victims on the floor, and terrified survivors scrambling for cover. 2 members of the Vu family, Chow and Kwok, managed to escape the gunfire by hiding in the walk-in cooler. They listened as the shooting continued, then waited in the dark, unsure if the killers would return. Kwok slipped out to find help, while Chow remained hidden, afraid to move. Minutes later, Antoinette Frank came back, this time in full police uniform, driving her marked patrol car. She walked through the crime scene, playing the part of a responding officer, expecting to control the narrative. But the survivors knew her. When real officers arrived, Chow emerged from her hiding place and immediately identified Frank as one of the shooters. There was no hesitation, no confusion. She named Frank on the spot, right there at the scene. The betrayal was personal. Frank had eaten meals with the family, joked with them, and now stood accused of murdering them in cold blood. The identification was swift and decisive, rooted in years of familiarity. In court, the survivor's testimony was impossible to shake. Frank's attempt to hide behind her badge only made things worse. She was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1995. To this day, she remains the only woman on Louisiana's death row. January 1995, Knoxville. 18-year-old Krista Gale Pike signed out of her campus dorm with Colleen Slemmer and never brought her back. Driven by jealousy and a twisted need to impress her boyfriend, Pike led Slemmer into the woods behind the University of Tennessee agricultural campus. There, Pike and her accomplices tortured and killed Slemmer, and a pentagram was carved into the victim. What Pike did next would turn suspicion into certainty. Instead of hiding her involvement, Pike kept a small bone fragment as a trophy. She carried it in her jacket pocket and showed it to classmates and even to staff. Some thought it was a disturbing rumor. Others saw the fragment up close and were unsettled by Pike's casual display. Meanwhile, campus security logs revealed a glaring discrepancy. Both Pike and Slemmer signed out together, but only Pike returned. The logbook, meant for routine comings and goings, now pointed directly to Pike as the last person seen with Slemmer alive. When police caught up with Pike, they searched her jacket and found the bone fragment. Forensic anthropologists examined the piece and confirmed it was human cranial bone, consistent with the missing portion of Slemmer's skull. The fit was undeniable. Faced with the physical evidence and the logbook records, Pike confessed to the murder. Her actions left no room for doubt. In 1996, she was sentenced to death, becoming the youngest woman on Tennessee's death row. Her execution date is set for September 2026. The bone fragment she carried was not just a keepsake, it was the evidence that sealed her fate. A single bone fragment no bigger than a coin can hold the answer to a murder case. In forensic anthropology, the first step is to determine if a fragment is actually human bone. Under the microscope, experts look for the porous, honeycomb structure unique to human cranial bone, a pattern no plastic or animal bone can mimic. Once confirmed as human, the next challenge is matching it to a specific individual. That means comparing the fragment's thickness, curvature, and even the color to the missing portions of the victim's skull. Forensic anthropologists line up the fracture edges like pieces of a puzzle, checking for a fit so precise it rules out coincidence. Sometimes they examine tool marks or microscopic scratches on the bone, matching them to injuries found on the remains. In rare cases, DNA can be extracted from marrow or tissue left on the fragment, but most identifications rely on physical and anatomical features. Chain of custody is critical. From the moment a fragment is collected, every transfer is logged: who handled it, when, and for what purpose. Each time it leaves evidence storage, the movement is documented to prevent any question of tampering. In court, the expert explains how the fragment was secured, stored, and analyzed step by step. Even a tiny piece of bone, if matched correctly and tracked without gaps, becomes irrefutable evidence. It is not about the size of the fragment, it is the certainty of the science and the unbroken trail from crime scene to courtroom. In cases where a killer keeps a trophy, that fragment can speak louder than any confession, linking the crime to the person who carried it. Paul Warner Powell was already facing a life sentence for murder in Virginia when the state's highest court threw out his death sentence. The court said prosecutors had not proven he killed his 16-year-old neighbor during an attempted rape or robbery, so the case was downgraded to first-degree murder. Powell, convinced he was untouchable, decided to gloat. He wrote a letter to the Commonwealth's attorney that said since prosecutors could not try him again for capital murder, he would tell them the rest of what happened so they would know they had not heard the whole story. That letter became a confession. Powell described details of the crime that had never been proven in court, including a sexual motive and exactly how he tried to assault the victim. He put in writing everything the first jury had not heard. Prosecutors finally had the missing piece, and the letter became new evidence supporting a fresh indictment for capital murder. Double jeopardy did not protect him because the court ruled this was a more aggravated offense, backed by his new admissions. Powell went back on trial, was sentenced to death again, and was executed in March 2010. His belief that he had beaten the system was shattered by his own words, written from behind bars. November 2001, El Paso. David Renteria, a registered sex offender on probation, walked into a Walmart during the height of the Christmas shopping rush. He left his van running outside, drawing the attention of a security guard who took note of the vehicle and its plates. Inside the store, cameras tracked Renteria's every move. Walmart's network of CCTV systems covering entrances, exits, and aisles captured him as he approached a 5-year-old girl and led her away. The footage showed them leaving together, minute by minute, frame by frame. When the girl was reported missing, investigators reviewed hours of surveillance and quickly identified Renteria. The security guard's memory of the running van added another layer, linking the suspect to the parking lot. Police impounded the van and processed it for evidence. Swabs from the interior tested positive for the child's blood. Forensic technicians lifted a palm print from the door, matching it to Renteria. Every piece of evidence was logged and preserved, each transfer documented to prevent any question about contamination or mishandling. The combination of surveillance footage, eyewitness memory, and forensic science left no room for doubt. Renteria was arrested, tried, and convicted. On November 16, 2023, Texas carried out his execution. The decision to abduct a child from one of the most surveilled buildings in America and to leave a van running outside turned an unthinkable crime into an open and shut case. Legal systems are built to catch mistakes, sometimes even the ones made by the courts. When a death sentence is thrown out, most people assume the case is closed, but that is not always true. A conviction overturned on a technicality does not grant blanket immunity. Prosecutors can return to court with new evidence or with facts that fill in the gaps left by the first trial. In Paul Warner Powell's case, his own letter supplied the missing details that allowed prosecutors to pursue capital charges a second time. Double jeopardy, the principle that protects people from being tried twice for the same crime, does not apply when the second case is built on new admissions or a more aggravated version of the offense. Powell's belief that he was safe was rooted in a misunderstanding of the law, and his arrogance became his undoing. Mistakes like these do not just change legal outcomes, they shape the lives of victims' families. For those left behind, justice is rarely as simple as a verdict or a sentence. Every trial, every appeal, every headline brings the trauma back. Families and survivors often live with the pain for decades, watching as cases are retried and sentences are challenged. For some, the so-called dumb mistakes by offenders feel like a small measure of control, returning to a system that otherwise seems indifferent. But the reality is always more complicated. No amount of legal maneuvering or forensic certainty can undo the loss. Advocates remind us that behind every case file is a real person whose life was stolen and a family changed forever. The law may catch up to the guilty, but it can never make victims whole. Every year, digital forensics and surveillance technologies make it harder for criminals to hide or to outsmart their own arrogance. Even the most careless mistake, caught on camera or confessed in a letter, can mean life or death in court. Justice today often turns on a single reckless choice. The line between impunity and a prison cell has never been thinner. What would you never risk for a moment of evil?